All right, let's dive into the story of a woman whose death, well, it gave birth to a medical revolution. We're talking about a legacy that really makes you stop and think about what life even means, and the ethics of science itself. Her name was Henrietta Lacks.
So, on the surface, this just looks like a heartbreaking story, right? A young mom with 5 kids, only 31 years old, loses her battle with a really aggressive form of cervical cancer. But here's the thing, that's not where her story ends, not even close. In fact, you could say that's exactly where it all begins. See, while Henrietta herself passed away, a part of her just refused to die. These cells you're looking at, they were taken from her tumor, and in the lab, they started to divide. And then they did something scientists had literally never seen before. They just kept going. So how is this possible? This is the central mystery, isn't it? Her cells, which would soon be famous as HeLa cells, somehow achieved a kind of biological immortality. It's the stuff scientists had only dreamed about, and it completely unlocked a new era of medical research that, no exaggeration, changed the world forever. Okay, so before we get too deep into the science, which is incredible, we have to understand the person at the very center of it all. We need to go beyond the lab and meet the real Henrietta Lacks. So who was she? Well, she was born Loretta Pleasant back in 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia. She was a tobacco farmer from a very young age. She got married to David Day Lacks, had 5 kids, and they eventually moved to Turner Station, Maryland, hoping for a better life. She was a wife, a mom, a provider, just living her life, with no idea it was about to collide with history. So in 1951, not long after her 5th child was born, Henrietta felt what she described as a painful knot. She went to Johns Hopkins, which, was one of the only major hospitals that would even treat Black patients back then, and the diagnosis was devastating, a really, really severe case of cervical cancer. And it was right there, during her treatment at Johns Hopkins, that a seemingly routine procedure would kick off one of the biggest scientific discoveries ever. Okay, so to really get why this was such a massive deal, you have to understand this huge problem scientists had at the time. For years, every time they tried to grow human cells in a lab to study them, they'd just die within a few days, every single time. But Henrietta's cells? Wow, they were different. They reproduced like crazy, and they just wouldn't die. And this right here really gets to the heart of the injustice, doesn't it? I mean, look at this contrast. On one side, you have Henrietta's life. She died at 31, buried in an unmarked grave, and her family was left in poverty. And on the other side, her cells, still alive today, sent all over the world, and they became the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's just staggering. But here's the thing. This scientific miracle was built on a massive ethical problem. The single most important fact in all of this is that Henrietta Lacks had no idea what was being done with her body. None. This is the part of the story that's so hard to wrap your head around. A doctor took 2 samples from her, one from the tumor, one from healthy tissue, and sent them off to a researcher. Nobody asked her, nobody told her. Now, you could say this was common practice at the time, and it was, but looking back now, it's just this glaring example of a medical system that often failed to see patients as actual people. So, what's the big paradox here? It's that these cells, taken without any consent, went on to become one of the most important tools in the history of medicine. I mean, they were crucial for developing the polio vaccine. They've been used for everything: cancer research, AIDS, mapping our genes. They were even the first human cells ever cloned. Our modern medical world is, in so many ways, built on a foundation of HeLa cells. And if you want to understand the scale we're talking about, just look at this number. Around 11,000 patents. That's how many patents involve research done with her cells. It's an almost unimaginable scientific legacy, and it all came from one woman who was never even asked. So for decades, while this massive scientific revolution was happening all over the globe, the people who mattered most, Henrietta's own family, they were kept completely in the dark. This timeline, I mean, it's just unbelievable when you lay it out. She dies in 51, her cells help create the polio vaccine in 54. But it takes another 20 years, all the way until 1975, for her family to find out what happened. And how did they find out? Researchers just called them out of the blue, asking for blood samples to do more genetic studies. Can you imagine? So, what do? What happens when you find out a part of your mother has become public property without anyone ever knowing? Her cells were being bought and sold. Her private medical records were published. Years later, her entire genetic code was put online, all of it, without her family's consent. So this discovery, as you can imagine, kicked off a long, hard fight for the Lacks family. A fight not just for money, but for recognition, for some control over Henrietta's own legacy. And thankfully, in recent decades, the world has slowly started to set the record straight. Where she once lay in an unmarked grave, you now see historical markers. There are parks named in her honor. Finally, the story is shifting away from HeLa, the anonymous cell line, and back to the person, Henrietta Lacks. And this recognition, it's not just local, it's gone global. This statue here was unveiled at the University of Bristol in the UK. Think about that. A permanent, public monument to a woman whose incredible contribution to science was just erased for way, way too long. And her story, it's not just about memorials. It's forced real, lasting change in the world of bioethics. Johns Hopkins now holds a lecture series every year in her name. There's a federal law named after her to help promote diversity in clinical trials. The World Health Organization even gave an award to her son. And just recently, in 2023, her estate settled a lawsuit with a major biotech company. A huge moment that finally acknowledged the family's stake in her legacy. You know, it wasn't until 2010 that her family was finally able to put a headstone on her grave. And the words they chose, they bring this whole huge story about science and ethics right back down to its human core. It's a powerful reminder that behind the immortal cells was a mortal woman, a phenomenal woman whose story forces us, even today, to ask what science owes to the people whose bodies make its progress possible.